The following program was brought to you by CDEC, the California Inland Empire District Export Council, working with local, state, and federal organizations to provide resources and educational opportunities to help facilitate trade. And by the U.S. Commercial Service, a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, whose mission is to increase U.S. exports, enhance job creation, strengthen national security, promote and protect U.S. commercial interests abroad, and deliver customized solutions to ensure that U.S. businesses compete and win in the global marketplace.
I'm actually here to talk about how the Commerce Department works to help exporters that are facing trade barriers abroad when they're trying to export. I have the unique position of standing here and actually saying without any irony, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, and I have a large staff of people back at the Commerce Department who are essentially tasked with helping U.S. companies who are trying to compete in the international global trading system to make sure that you get the benefit of those trade agreements that we're negotiating, that were discussed this morning, and ensure that the rules are complied with and that you get the benefit of the level playing field that USTR negotiates so hard for when we negotiate these trade agreements. So I'm from the Enforcement and Compliance Unit at the International Trade Administration. That unit has essentially two principal responsibilities. One is to enforce the U.S. trade remedy laws, which are the anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws that help U.S. companies that are competing with unfairly traded imports. And that's a very large part of our staff because that's an actual congressionally mandated enforcement of U.S. laws that goes on, so it requires large investigative staff. The other part, which is more related to what we are here to talk about today, is the trade agreements compliance side of our work. And that side of the work looks at how to ensure that, again, like I said, that U.S. exporters are getting the benefit of the bargain when they're looking to invest or export to foreign countries. We monitor trade agreement operations around the world. We investigate trade barriers on our own, or when companies come to us and report problems that they're having entering markets or investing in markets. And then we engage with the foreign government to the trade partner, whether they're a WTO member or we have an FTA with them like we do with Chile. We engage with that government to try to seek voluntary compliance with the rules of the trade agreement. This has the benefit of solving the problem, we hope, before we end up in a dispute resolution or a WTO dispute panel, which is a lengthy and costly process that, you know, in the end, even if you do get a positive result, it often is too late for the specific company that was originally having the problem. So we prefer to do this ahead of time in a voluntary and diplomatic way. It also has the benefit of avoiding the diplomatic and economic fallout that you can often see from what can be a very tense dispute once you're in that WTO or FTA dispute situation. Those same experts in my staff who work on trade agreements compliance, and these are the experts that we have are specifically expert in different parts of trade agreements compliance, also work very closely with the USTR on the US negotiating team to help develop those new trade agreements that we're negotiating, the TPP and the TTIP. They're taking that benefit of of what they're learning from trade agreements compliance activities, the information they're getting from companies, the engagement they're having with foreign governments to help negotiate better and stronger, more robust trade agreements for the future so that U.S. exporters or U.S. investors seeking to operate abroad have even better rules to ensure that they have a level playing field. What are these rules that I'm talking about? I think everyone thinks about trade agreements, they think about tariffs coming down, and that's what we're trying to do as part of what we're doing in trade agreements is bringing those tariffs down, taking them down in the US, taking them down overseas so that goods can flow freely. But along with that, there's a complex set of rules and disciplines that go in those trade agreements to ensure that there aren't additional sort of non-tariff barriers that get in your way when you're trying to sell. So what those rules and disciplines that we're looking for, very basically what they're guaranteeing you is non-discrimination, that you get treated the same as the domestic company or the domestic investor, transparency, that you know what the rules are, predictability, that was summarized nicely as the no surprises, and access to the market. Each of these concepts play out a little differently in the different kinds of rules you see in FTAs or in WTO agreements, but that's the basic rights that we're looking for our exporters. So let me just talk a little bit about the kinds of agreements that we have and the kinds of barriers that we're helping to bring down. The first one is the sort of what we call border measures. These will be customs rules or import licenses or other kinds of discriminatory or unfair evaluations and customs procedures that are slowing down, stopping, or otherwise blocking your access through a measure that's imposed at the border. We have a team of customs and border measure experts who can help you with that, both in the WTO agreements and with regard to the FTAs. We have technical barriers to trade and sanitary and phytosanitary rules. These kinds of barriers are the ones you're going to encounter where you're going to find a regulation that's discriminatory, or a regulation that's a testing requirement that you can't meet, or that has rules that are applied differently to you than they are to your competitor. Those technical barriers to trade, again, very frequently encountered. Oftentimes, it's not an intentional discrimination when a foreign government imposes these regulations, but sometimes it is thrown up as an intentional barrier. But either way, we can help you with the rules to try to get those barriers removed so that you can compete on a level playing field with your domestic competitors. Government procurement's another big area where there's a set of rules that guarantee fair and transparent access for U.S. companies trying to compete in that government procurement space, which is often a very big market in many countries, as it is in the U.S. Another set of rules is the rules on subsidies. We often think of those rules in terms of the U.S. countervailing duty laws that help the U.S. companies to combat unfairly traded imports when they are competing at low prices because of the subsidies they're receiving abroad. And that is one discipline that the WTO agreement on subsidies allows us to impose. But there are also disciplines on subsidies when those subsidies are abroad or unfair, when they're export subsidies, for example, and you have trouble competing in a third country because of the subsidization that your competitor is getting from their government. Again, we would work in the Commerce Department with those governments to try to engage them to remove those unfair subsidies without having to go to a WTO dispute resolution. There's also rules with regard to anti-dumping. We often think about the US imposing our anti-dumping laws against imports, but lots of other countries use the anti-dumping rules, and there are a specific set of disciplines that require that that be done in an open, transparent way with due process. If you're facing an anti-dumping investigation abroad, we have a team of people who can help you to ensure that the foreign government is not using that in an improper fashion or implementing those laws in a way that's unfair, that undermines your ability to trade. Those are sort of the traditional, I run out of time. Those are the traditional trade disciplines. But we also have a lot of new disciplines that we're pushing for in these new 21st century agreements. The U.S. government is pushing for stronger investment guarantees, investment protections for investors abroad. Regulatory coherence is an area where we're working with our foreign trading partners to try to help and encourage them to engage in a regulatory process that is more streamlined, more transparent, coherent across their government, which helps that transparency element where you're not going to face surprises, or we're going to avoid those technical barriers to trade that I was talking about earlier, because the trade impacts of a regulation will be considered before it's imposed, and so you won't get those accidental technical barriers to trade when no one was trying to block trade, but they ended up doing it. State-owned enterprises is another area where we're pushing for new disciplines. These disciplines deal with this 21st century problem that we're seeing with a rise in state-owned enterprises competing in the commercial space and imposing disciplines on how those are handled so that the competition is still fair and we have a level playing field. How does my office actually help? We do monitor our trade agreements. We monitor foreign governments' activities and try to identify these problems, but it's a big world. There's a lot of, a lot of different ways trade barriers can arise. So we need your help. If you feel like you're encountering a trade barrier in your in your commercial activity, pick up the phone, send us an email. There are brochures out there. There's some of my staff are here and going to be here longer than I am, who can even like talk to you today and hear what you have to say. You don't have to come to us and say, I'm facing a border measure or a technical barrier to trade or a government procurement problem. All you have to do is say, I have a problem, and we can figure out if there's a trade agreement obligation that's going to help you overcome that problem or get that barrier removed. That's what our experts are for. We work within the International Trade Administration, which, in addition to the Enforcement and Compliance Office, which is where I work, has a Global Markets Office, which is full of people who have regional and country expertise. We have folks that post in a lot of the countries around the world. We also have an Industries and Analysis Office, which has industry experts. When we get a report from a company of a trade barrier or a problem they're facing abroad, what we do is we form a team of our expert, who's expert on that trade compliance and that agreement around the world and how the rules are supposed to work, put them together with the experts on the ground in that region or that country, the experts on that country in capital, and with the industry person, if there's an appropriate industry person in our office, to all work together on a team to try to overcome that trade barrier, whether that be, and we can do that by leveraging the WTO, leveraging the agreements that we have, and also, using our leadership. We've escalated problems up to having the Secretary of Commerce raise them in bilats that she have. We have a lot of different ways to try to get that voluntary compliance that can solve the problem before we get to the WTO dispute or an FTA dispute. I promised when we were preparing for this that I would just talk very briefly about the U.S. trade remedy laws, because I think they're an important part of our trade compliance activities. This is the District Export Council, so I won't dwell on those, but we do have laws in the United States which are sanctioned by all of our trade agreements, by the WTO and the trade rules, that allow us to attempt to remedy unfairly traded imports. The dumping laws are there to address unfair pricing practices, essentially in the sort of 101 version of it, when a company is selling, cross-subsidizing by selling at a lower price in the United States and they're selling at home, or when they're selling their product below their cost of production here in the United States. That does not allow the importer here to compete. And I think this is important for exporters, because very few exporters are not also competing in the domestic market and facing competition from imports. There are laws in place that can help you if you feel like you're facing and are injured by those unfairly traded imports, and we actually have a team of experts who can advise you if you think you're facing those problems as to whether the laws would work for you, and can even help you by reviewing a petition for an investigation to see if it meets the criteria that would be required to start that kind of investigation. There's also countervailing duty laws. Those laws are there to remedy unfairly traded imports that are subsidized by foreign governments. Again, we have teams that can help you examine your problem and decide whether that's the right path that would help you. And in fact, Meredith is back there from my office. She actually used to work in our trade remedies petition counseling area, so she's actually a very special expert in that area if you need to talk to someone. And Fernando is back there from my office, from the trade remedy compliance staff. They have brochures. They can tell you exactly what you need to do and take your specific questions anytime during the rest of today. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is. If you're facing trade barriers abroad, there are probably rules. There are probably rules in place to help remove those trade barriers, and we have teams of people at headquarters in Commerce who can help you try to remove those trade barriers. But for us to know about those, we need your help. We need you to contact us. Even if you think, oh, I can live with this, or I can work around this, or it's not that big, the government would never help me. There's no cost to the service. There's no minimum dollar amount that you have to come with us to say is being affected for us to help you. In fact, if you come with a small problem, and you come with a small problem, and you come with a small problem, we might figure out that it's really a big problem because there's a number of companies that are all facing the same export problem in a particular country. And this will allow us to leverage to solve the problem for everyone. So Look at our brochures, know we're here to help you, and remember that when we negotiate trade agreements with the US government, we're not just negotiating tariff reductions, we're negotiating rules of the game, and rules that say that the playing field needs to be level, and there can't be unfair government actions that block market access that was negotiated in those trade agreements, and that's what we're here to try to remove.